Welcome back into our second half hour in Theology and Philosophy, where we're talking about, this is an introduction to systematic theology. This is TH100, the course here for our master's and doctoral students, and we're going into the concepts of philosophical impact, theory, and philosophies in theology. Now, where we left off at the tail end of our last session, we were talking about deconstruction, the philosophy of deconstruction. I'm going to go back to that issue, okay? Because, as I said to you, I'm convinced that it is a kissing cousin to existentialism or existential philosophy. And if you remember, I said this to you just at the end of our last session. I said to you that if existentialism is a philosophical theory, or it's an approach, okay, which emphasizes the existence of an individual person, right? You and I as individuals, okay, as free and responsible agents determining our own development through acts of our will. Okay? So then, just as we dive into deconstruction, and since it is a kissing cousin to existentialism, then you have to ask the question, then, what does an existentialist believe? Okay, because this is the jumping off point for this, right? And what he believes is that it's a philosophical theory, okay, that people are free agents. Right? We have no constraints whatsoever, right? And we have control over our choices and our actions. So an existentialist believes, right, that the society should not restrict an individual's life or actions, and that these restrictions inhibit free will, okay, and the development of that person's potential sometime in the future. Now, if this is how he's supposed to act, and this is what he believes, then how does he go about carrying that out? And this is where deconstruction comes in, right? And so, in its origin, deconstruction has been initially in literary criticism rather than in professional philosophy, such as associated especially with the thought of the French literary critic. Okay, and I'm always amazed how this is either North American or it is European somewhere. Okay? And you know, the Western world thinks that it has a handle on all knowledge all over the world. Okay? Well, remember I told you in my last session that back in 1972, 73, 74, 75, when I was in college, we had to study, and it was a big buzz. It was a really, really big buzz back then, right, about Jacques Derrida, okay, or Jacques Derrida. Right? And it's also presented by persons such as Stanley Fish is another guy we had to study. Mitchell Foucault is another one that we had to study. And I want you to know, deconstruction is widely influential, okay? Especially in literature departments all over the world in colleges and universities. Okay? Although there are some indications that this popularity is beginning to decline, but by and large, it's still there. It is still there, because if you can quit, and then you go, well, brother, what's the big deal with this? Because it gives you the authority and the illusion of the power, okay, to question the written word. Once you do that in literary circles, okay, and I remember this distinctly, and I remember as a young student, I was in college, and I really didn't understand everything, but I do remember the professor, okay, taking the Bible as a literary book, okay, and begin to rip through this page after page after page after page after page, okay, in deconstruction philosophy. Now do you see what I'm talking about? Okay? And this is where it began, because it could not be questioned, okay, at the university level. Now, one point for beginning, okay, our understanding of deconstruction, okay, may be to note that Derrida studied under Heidegger, okay? And remember, we talked about him some time back, okay? And in some ways, this literary critical movement may be understood as the extension of Heidegger's thought, in particular of existentialism in general, which is the reason I'm telling you that I'm convinced, okay, that existentialism and deconstruction are kissing cousins here, okay? And so for the most part, philosophy has been a concern with a search for truth. But it has its own mechanism for the search of that truth. And that's what you need to grasp here, okay? And so, and by which was meant that objective truth. Somehow going to try to find some objective truth using subjective means, okay? And so the question of the reality, so what it does, it questions the reality of ideas and statements. Did you hear what it just said? It questions the ideas, okay, of the reality of ideas and statements, which means that the Word of God, the Bible, God's whole Word, okay, His holy Word is questionable. You can question the reality of its ideas, you can question the reality of its statements, okay, based on this concept of deconstruction, which is why we see preachers doing that today, okay? So that was the understanding of truth, okay, as objective. The problem is that they become the arbiters of truth. They become the arbiters of objectivity. So the proposition is true to the degree that it corresponds to or correctly describes the phenomena that it claims to describe. Now, I need to go back to subjective truth, okay? Because on the other hand, subjective truth, okay, is the effect that the proposition has someone knowing it. And so this distinction is what really distinguished, and it was highlighted by Kierkegaard, okay? And remember, we talked about him also, okay? And it was elaborated more so by Heidegger. And he's the one who really just took this thing even further, okay? So when this kind of a distinction is carried over into the field of literary criticism, okay, the question becomes that the meaning becomes that of the meaning rather than the truth. What did you just say? Again, the question becomes that of meaning rather than the truth. You remember when I said to you, and I don't remember which session I said this to you, I said, well, you have a Bible study and you got somebody who's facilitating the Bible study, and they're sitting there and go, well, what do you think this verse means to you? It's not the truth of the verse, it's what it means to you. And so deconstruction, okay, and subjectivism, okay, plays a big part in this idea and this concept, okay? And so you need to understand that, right? So, but there was an early approach. And the early approach had sought the meaning as that which the author had intended to express, okay? So increasingly of late, okay, and we're seeing this more and more, okay, the interest in the text is not the terms of an objective meaning placed by the author, but the meaning given to it by the reader. Now, are you getting the picture, the idea? Which is the reason why, look, master student, look, doctoral student, you're a pastor. I mean, your feet is at the ground level. You're in the pulpit and you're talking to people, or you're counseling in your office, or you go to make a visit to their home and you counsel them, and they go, but that's not, I don't think that's what it means to me. And you hear this phrase, and what it does, it discounts the objectivity of the truth of what God intended to say. Well, this is what's permeated, right, the colleges and universities around the world, and especially in the Western world. And we all know that the Western world has exported this all over the rest of the world. So, corresponding to this kind of an understanding of language, or this is how you approach language, that at face value, it is not objective the truth, it is what it means to you. So rather than language referring to some external of itself, this approach sees the referent, okay, or the point of reference of language as being other language, okay. So you have this arbitrary imposition of another approach to use of language, and you could just impose that. And so the meaning emerges not from attempting to isolate the objective, okay, non-linguistic meaning of words, but in the free play of words themselves. And so, if you kind of take this just a step further here, then it means that words mean nothing. They don't mean anything, okay? And so you kind of got to get an idea of this. And so when you combine this kind of approach, it's really, you know what it is? Deconstruction is rejection of traditional logic. So you get things like this, okay? 1 plus 1 is not 2. 1 plus 1 is 11. This is the kind of thinking that you get here, okay? And you have to understand it, which is why I emphasize. I know all of you guys out there listening to me, you're following some teacher, some professor, you're following some theologian, some famous preacher, okay? But you never bother to ask, okay, who does he follow and what are their backgrounds? Because everything slips in somewhere along the line. Right? So for Derrida, okay, he says, it is thus not simply false to say that, and he uses the phrase, okay, that Melamar is a Platonist, okay, or Hegelian, but it is above all not true, and vice versa. That's double gobbledygook. That's double talk, okay? And so much of Derrida's argument is rejection, even a denunciation of logocentrism, which is to be centralized in simple logic. Okay, and although the term is never really thoroughly defined, okay, it appears to represent all of the approaches that regard sounds as representation of meaning present in the speaker's consciousness. Okay? So this is regarded as a philosophy with a long history, and you know what? It's oriented toward what? Toward the order of meaning, truth, logic, and reason, which exists in itself, independent of anyone knowing it. So the order of meaning is then considered the foundation of which all language rests and which it refers. And this is basically, and this is nonsense, because the order of language in many cultures is absolutely different. What you need to do is to get the interpretation of the order of the language in that culture to grasp and understand what the objective truth is that they're communicating to you in their language. Okay? And so, henceforth, once again, we take the Word of God, okay? And so, since I teach around the world, okay, and I always ask my students around the world, and when I do Bible studies, I do a lot of Bible studies in house churches around the world as well, by Zoom and Skype with me. And so I like to stay at that. I teach at the seminary level constantly. I'm training pastors again, but I love teaching Bible studies in small churches around the world. And I ask somebody, okay, in your language. And so I'll tell them, I said, well, in your language, I say, here, I'm going to read this verse to you in my language, and this is what it says. Now tell me what it says in your language and interpret it back to me in English. And you discover something different. So then I have to ask the next logical question. Okay, well, tell me how you understand this verse based of your language and the order of your language, how it's used. And they'll begin to elucidate, they'll begin to explain it to me, and so on. I go, okay, you got the correct understanding. Or no, you don't have the correct understanding, because there's something wrong with that interpretation. So then I have to take them back to the original Hebrew language in the Old Testament, or back to the original language in the Greek language in the New Testament, so that they can begin to understand and go, yeah, we don't have that word, or we don't have that phrase, or we don't have that concept in our language. And so this is the best that they could do for translation. Well, see, that's understandable. But don't tell me, okay, that it doesn't have an order, and that order doesn't have a meaning. Okay? So, in deconstruction, okay, it's a rejection. It's a rejection to any attempt to discover and to express the underlying pattern of reality. Then we get to another guy, okay, and remember, because you have to remember that logocentrism plays a role in this thing, okay? You have to remember that, okay? And Heidegger, it's an kind of amazing thing. He still has a lot of. He's a German philosopher, if you didn't know that. Okay, Martin Heidegger, and he was a German philosopher. He was considered to be a seminal thinker, somebody who just placed the seeds, okay, that really made this thing to grow, okay. And he's best known for his contributions to phenomenology, okay, to hermeneutics, and to existentialism, okay. Did you hear hermeneutics and existentialism? Hello, okay. And how you put those two together, those two things together, is beyond me. But he does it. He does it, okay. Which is why, bam, he became big in the. And by the way, he didn't die that long. He didn't die that long ago. Heidegger, he died in 1976, and he had a really big impact in a lot of the lives of seminaries. Okay, but Derrida, he also comes with this idea of a logocentrism. Okay, so logocentrism, what is it in deconstruction? Okay, and so according to him, logocentrism, okay, is the attitude that the logos, which is the Greek term for speech, okay, for talking, okay. It's the Greek term for thought, okay? It's the Greek term for law. It's the Greek term for reason, depending on the context how you use it, okay? So it's for speech, thought, law, and reason, okay? And for him, it's the central principle of language and philosophy. So logocentrism, okay, asserts that writing is a substitute for speech, okay, and that writing is an attempt to restore the presence of speech. Well, I got that. I understand that, okay. I wouldn't argue that issue with you, because God said, write this down. Write this down, okay. So that's clear. But where it takes a left turn, okay, down the road to somewhere that's incomprehensible, is to say that it has that the order of the language, okay, doesn't always necessarily have significance. I don't think God was confused when he spoke. I don't think he just rambled on and babbled, these rambless thoughts, okay, and then somebody threw the dice, and all of a sudden the words came out in the right order. So you need to get an idea, and this is but yet this is where a lot of young preachers, okay, who've been to some kind of a secular education and have no clue that they've been influenced in this area, okay. So, and I said to you earlier, there's a guy by the name of John Ellis, okay, and he summarized logocentrism this way. He said, as deconstruction appears to conceive of the illusion and the meaning of a word, has its origin in the structure of reality itself, and hence makes all the truth about the structure seem directly present to the mind. And you go, well, what did he say? Well, the problem is that when the terms of a given language, pictures, you have a given language's picture, okay, of reality becomes so compelling that no one cannot conceive any alternative, then they appear not simply to be present in interpretation of things, but the way reality is. So rather, we must see the meaning is not derived from some essential feature, okay, of how things are, but it's arbitrary. So what you do is you take these meanings, okay, and these word phrases and these sentences in literary criticism, and you go, well, that's just arbitrary. No. Imagine how they apply that to the Word of God. Well, that's just arbitrary. Can you imagine somebody says, well, God said, thou shalt not kill. That's arbitrary. Thou shalt not rape. That's arbitrary. Thou shalt not steal. That's arbitrary. I mean, just think this thing through. And Derrida, he's the big apple in this issue. Okay, he draws the thought of the linguistic. Okay, from the linguist to Saussure, and Saussure was another guy. Okay, and he contended that the ideas do not merely reflect ideas and the inherent shape of the world. They don't. Okay, every signifier is also a signifier. Okay, so it's almost like you could take a noun and make it a verb, okay, and then you turn around and make the verb and you make it a noun, okay. Well, yeah, I understand that happens from time to time, but when you're doing that all the time, man, that just turns language upside down, okay. I don't care what language you're speaking, okay. And so there is no transcendental signifier, something that transcends a truth all the way across. There's no on theology. Okay, what we have instead is this limitless, unlimited, endless play of differences, okay, which never terminates in anything other than the words themselves. So what did I just say to you? Nothing. Absolutely nothing of value. Because words then ultimately do not mean something, because they're always in a state of flux, in a state of change. And once again, then we have the luxury to do the same thing with this word. And this is what we got preachers doing today. Frequently there is combined with this idea of logocentrism, okay, or the idea that words express genuine object reality, okay, has been used, listen to this carefully, has been used oppressively. And so I've actually heard preachers say this kind of stuff from the pulpit. They represent an attempt of some persons to impose their ideas on others. So I have the right to impose my ideas on others. And in order to resist this effort, okay, it is necessary to deconstruct language and the arguments to expose this oppressive use of language. This is alive and well today. Then you go, oh, Brother Eddie, I got a headache. I just don't understand what you're talking about. Well, let me give you some very simple kinds of things, which is the reason why we have the ordination of homosexuals today. In the pulpits, in the ministries, we have the ordination of women, okay, in the ministry. I mean, the list is endless, because the language in reference to them in the Bible has always been oppressive. So we have to make up for that. And this is where deconstruction comes in. Okay? And it should be apparent that far-reaching consequences are at the stake at this particular dispute of the use of language. And this is a philosophy. Okay? A number of criticisms have been and can be leveled effectively, I am convinced, against deconstructionism. Okay? And one of the frustrating things about examining and evaluating deconstruction, okay, is the nature of the response. Frequently, deconstructionists, okay, replies that the criticism assumes that the disputed logocentrism, okay, and there appears to be an attempt to seal its own ideas off from any criticism. So in deconstructionism, okay, I can criticize your ideas. I can criticize how you wrote that particular concept. I can criticize how you preach that particular concept, because it's both written and speech. Okay, and on this basis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But you cannot criticize mine, because I am the arbiter of final truth. Okay? And that's what we have. Okay? So, nonetheless, I think we have to raise some questions here. Okay. Now, first one: if it is the case, okay, the case that the prevailing logic is invalid, okay, then what is the nature of the logic that is being used to carry on the discussion of which logic is to be found? So if my logic is invalid, okay, then what makes your logic valid? The question can, of course, be carried to all kinds of additional levels, okay? So you remember the guy that I mentioned to you, Wittgenstein, okay? Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein, okay? what language game is used to discuss various language games, okay? Because ultimately that's what it becomes, is a language game. Remember him? Yeah? And so you have to ask these kind of questions because it forces them, because I need to hear them saying what they're going to say. Now, if deconstruction is to be followed, if, okay? And presumably deconstruction itself must be deconstructed. Hello? Did I miss something here? If I'm going to follow the logic of deconstruction, then deconstruction itself has to be deconstructed in my mind. Okay? But if this is the case, then there is no more commendable or desirable than any other a competitive theory. That is that it defeats its own purpose because it comes full circle to bite it. Okay, look. And then third, deconstructionists, okay, frequently attempt to demonstrate the cogency of their view by showing the flaws in logocentrism. No, but aren't you depending on logocentrism? That really is not much positive argument for deconstruction. Now, remember, I'm only giving you an introduction to all of this, okay? And yeah, I had the advantage when I was in college. We actually had to study it out in detail, all this stuff, okay? And you probably have never heard of half of this stuff. And I got that. I understand. I'm just giving you an idea, okay, of what's happening. And you can smell this. You can hear it, okay, as these people stand in the pulpit and they unpack their sermons. And you go, whoa, wait a minute. Where is this guy coming from? Okay? So, this assumes that there are only two options. Okay? And that is that if logocentrism is not acceptable, then deconstruction must be acceptable. That's the only two alternatives we have. If logocentrism, okay, it is, remember I told you, it's thought, okay, it's law, okay, I said that it's reason, right, okay, and I told you that if those things are true, okay, that's what logo, to be focusing on the word that represents these things, okay, and we know then that logocentrism, and we know that deconstruction cannot exist at the same time because they cancel each other out. So one has to be and the other not. Mm-hmm. So a number of critics have pointed this out, that deconstruction is not only a view that has been critical of logocentrism. Okay? Why then should it be accepted rather than one of these other views? And Saussure, which is one of the other men that I mentioned to you earlier, okay, his argument that the meaning of words is relative to the language, okay, in which they're used not to mean that they have no objective meaning. Brother, I'm just getting a headache. What is this about? Look, here's the fourth area. Deconstructionists, okay, have great difficulty living with their own theory. Because once a deconstructionist has deconstructed, your value statements, okay, then by logic he has to deconstruct his own. Mm-hmm. They want to insist that deconstruction is not simply a play on words, but it is the way it is, and that the meaning of their words is objectively what they intended them to be. Now, you don't have that luxury; only they do. Mm-hmm. And so the reader, the papa of all this, he's the daddy of all this, okay? He insisted that John Searle, right, S-E-A-R-L-E-E, John Searle, okay, was misunderstanding what he was saying, okay? How can this be true, however, if the meaning is not something objectively expressed by the source of the words, okay? So it may, of course, be objected that this insistence on logic consistently is only a value on traditional grounds, but if this is so, okay, then why is the reader so upset with Searle? Because he uses the same reasoning. Are they not both right as to the meaning of the reader's words? No, the reader, I understand exactly what you said. So I want you to grasp this idea with me, okay? And so, now, So we've looked at we've looked at all of these different philosophies, okay? And I wanted you to see this with me because it really is. I think you get the idea, okay? So we looked at pragmatism, we looked at existentialism, we looked at analytical philosophy, we looked at process philosophy, we looked at deconstruction, and so now what we're going to do in our next class, we're going to look at theology's use of philosophy.